The moment she spoke his true name, the ancient chill in the great hall vanished. For centuries, Lord Valerius had been a creature of ice and shadow, a king whose presence could frost a window pane in high summer. He was power incarnate, a being for whom all mortals were temporary, fleeting, and ultimately replaceable. And she, Elara, was the most replaceable of all, a disgraced cartographer's apprentice brought to his castle as little more than a scribe with a steady hand. But what no one knew, what he had long forgotten, was that a name held the key to a man's soul, even a soul as old and cold as his. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the vampire king felt the agonizing, terrifying warmth of his own heart beginning to beat. If you believe that being truly seen by one person can change a soul the world has given up on, type, "I see you" below, and let me tell you what happened next. To understand how she got there, you need to know that Elara's world had been shattered by a map. Not a map of coastlines or kingdoms, but a map of things no one else could see. She had tried to explain it to the Royal Cartographers Guild, her voice earnest and trembling as she pointed to the faint, shimmering lines of energy she saw flowing through the land, connecting ancient stones and forgotten groves. They had called it fantasy, hysteria. Master Theron, her mentor, had publicly denounced her work, his face a mask of patronizing pity. He declared her theories a disgrace to the craft of precision and fact. She was demoted, stripped of her instruments, and relegated to mixing inks and copying the work of real cartographers. She was a ghost in the halls she once dreamed of commanding. Her punishment was to be useful, but invisible. And so, when the summons came from the reclusive Lord Valerius, demanding the guild's best to chart his vast, untamed northern territories, Master Theron saw an opportunity. He would lead the expedition himself, a grand project to restore his own prestige, and he would bring Elara. Not for her skill, but for her shame. She would be his living cautionary tale, the failed prodigy forced to carry his tripods and clean his pens. The journey to Castle Volkov was a journey into winter's heart. The forests grew thicker, the pines heavy with a snow that never seemed to melt. The air thinned, carrying the scent of cold iron and ancient stone. The castle itself was a jagged tear in the sky, a fortress of black granite that seemed to drink the very light from the air. When the great doors groaned open, the cold that rolled out was not natural. It was a living thing, a presence that coiled around their bones and stole the breath from their lungs. Lord Valerius received them in the grand hall of echoes. He was impossibly still, a statue carved from moonlight and shadow, seated on a throne of polished jet. His eyes, the color of a twilight sky just before it bruises to black, swept over the delegation of puffed-up, important men from the capital. He was courteous, his voice a low, resonant hum like a cello string played in a crypt, but his politeness was a blade. It held them at a distance, reminded them of their fleeting warmth, their fragile mortality. Elara stood at the back, clutching a case of quills, her gaze lowered. She could feel his presence like a pressure change in the air. The candles in the great iron chandeliers flickered, their flames dancing as if in a private wind that only blew around him. His shadow, she noticed, was not quite attached to his heels. It pooled a little too deeply, stretched a little too far, and seemed to breathe with a life of its own. Master Theron, oblivious, was in his element, bowing and scraping with practiced ease. He spoke of contour lines and elevation markers, of the great service the guild would do for his lordship. Valerius listened, his face a mask of aristocratic indifference. Finally, he rose, his movement so fluid It was as if he simply ceased to be in one place and appeared in another. "Your paper maps are adequate," he said, the word a dismissal. "But my domain is not so easily rendered in ink. There is a truer map, one you must understand before you measure a single league of my lands." He led them from the hall, his footsteps silent on the cold stone. They walked through corridors that felt like forgotten centuries, past tapestries depicting hunts of beasts that no longer walked the earth. He brought them to a circular chamber, its domed ceiling lost in darkness. The air here was different. It smelled of dust and ozone, of static electricity just before a lightning strike. The entire floor was a map, a mosaic of millions of tiny colored stones sprawling across the vast chamber. It was a masterpiece of chaos. Rivers of shattered lapis lazuli cut through continents of broken jade. Mountains of obsidian shards lay in ruins. It was beautiful, but it was utterly broken, a geography of forgotten disaster. Master Theron stared, his face falling. "My lord, this is magnificent, but it is useless. It is shattered beyond any hope of interpretation." The other cartographers murmured in agreement. It was a relic, not a tool, a fool's errand. But Elara wasn't looking at the broken stones. She was looking beneath them. For there, faint as a breath on a winter morning, were the lines. The same shimmering silver-blue lines of energy she had seen on her own maps. Here, they were not faint theories, but a vibrant, wounded network. They pulsed with a weak, sickly light, flowing from the broken pieces, trying to connect, trying to heal. The mosaic wasn't a map of the land. It was a map of a life force, a soul. Without thinking, without permission, she stepped forward. Her worn boots made a soft scuffing sound that echoed in the profound silence. All eyes turned to her. Master Theron's face flushed with fury at her presumption. "Forgive me, my lord," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She pointed a trembling finger not at the mosaic, but at the light only she could see. "The rivers are wrong. They are not broken. They are bleeding. The energy, it pools here, by the onyx mountains, but it cannot cross the fractured plains. It's being blocked." The hall was so quiet she could hear the wax dripping from a distant candle. Master Theron opened his mouth to berate her, to drag her away, but he was stopped by a single, quiet sound. Lord Valerius had taken a breath, a sharp, audible intake of air, the first sign of anything other than perfect, cold control. His dark eyes, which had dismissed kings and kungs and councils, were now fixed on her. Not on her face, but on her finger, pointing to a place of invisible pain that he had felt as a dull ache in his own being for longer than she had ancestors. "You," he said, and the single word cut through the air, sharp and absolute. "You see it." It was not a question. It was a statement of impossible fact. In that moment, Elara ceased to be a disgraced apprentice. She ceased to be invisible. In the ancient, frozen heart of Lord Valerius, something had shifted. A dormant predator had lifted its head, its attention captured not by a show of strength or beauty, but by a quiet girl who could see the cracks in his soul. Master Theron's face was a study in apoplectic rage. He stepped forward, his voice sputtering. "My lord, I must apologize for my apprentice. She is prone to flights of fancy, a troubled mind. She will be disciplined." Lord Valerius did not look at him. His gaze remained locked on Elara. a look of such intensity it felt like a physical touch. "Your apprentice," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Will be staying. The rest of you are dismissed. Your services are no longer required." The pronouncement fell into the chamber like a block of ice. The cartographers stared, mouths agape. Master Theron's face went from red to a sickly white. To be sent away, to have his grand commission handed to a disgraced girl he'd brought along as a servant, it was a humiliation beyond measure. "But my lord," he protested, "she is nothing, a novice. She knows nothing of true cartography." "She knows more than you ever will," Valerius replied, a chilling finality in his tone. He made a subtle gesture with one hand, and the great doors of the chamber began to swing shut, moved by an unseen force. "Leave! Now!" The guild members scrambled out, casting looks of fear and confusion back at the lone figure of Elara, who stood frozen in the center of the vast, broken map. Master Theron gave her one last look, a glare of pure, venomous hatred, before he was swallowed by the closing darkness. The doors boomed shut, the sound echoing and then fading into a profound, unnerving silence. Elara was alone with him. The cold in the room deepened, and she could see her breath misting in the air. The shadows seemed to crawl from the corners, lengthening and twisting at the edges of her vision. She felt a primal fear, the terror of a mouse finding itself locked in a cage with a sleeping lion. She finally found her voice, a small, wavering thing. "My lord, I don't understand." He moved then, gliding toward her across the mosaic floor, his feet making no sound on the shattered stone. He stopped just inches from her, and she had to crane her neck to look up at him. He was a monolith of darkness and power. "You see the light beneath the stone," he said, his voice a low murmur that vibrated in her chest. "For 900 years, I have brought the finest minds to this room. Scholars, mystics, mages. They saw only broken tiles. They saw a ruin. You saw the wound." He knelt, an act so unexpected it startled a gasp from her. He was now at her eye level, and the proximity was overwhelming. She could smell the scent of cold night air, of old leather and something else, something like dry earth after a long drought. His eyes were not merely dark. They were deep, holding the weight of forgotten ages. "This is not a map of my lands, Cartographer," he explained, his gaze sweeping over the fractured mosaic. "It is a map of my memory. My soul, if you believe such a thing still exists for my kind. Ages ago it was shattered by a betrayal so profound it broke me. I was left incomplete. I rule. I exist, but I do not remember. Not fully. There are vast, empty plains in my mind where there were once mountains of knowledge. There are silent rivers where there once flowed currents of feeling." Elara stared at him, her fear slowly being replaced by a dawning, terrifying comprehension. The pulsing, blocked energy she saw on the floor. It was his life, his history, his very identity, hemorrhaging into nothingness for centuries. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice steadying. "I want you to fix it," he said simply. "I want you to trace the lines your eyes can see. I want you to mend the rivers and rebuild the mountains. I want you to navigate the ruins of my mind and find what was stolen from me." A cold dread washed over her. This was not cartography. This was something far more intimate, far more dangerous. To map a man's soul. What would she find in those dark, forgotten corners? What monsters lay sleeping in the rubble? "And if I refuse?" she dared to ask. His lips curved in a smile that held no warmth, only a deep, ancient sorrow. You are in my castle, miles from any living soul who knows your name. You were brought here by a man who despises you. You are, by the world's accounting, utterly alone and without value. You have no choice. He paused, his eyes searching hers. But I will not command you. I will ask. Help me, and I will give you anything you desire. Wealth, status, knowledge, a new life, far from the petty men who scorned you. Elara looked from his haunted eyes to the broken map at her feet. She thought of Master Theron's sneering face, of the guild members laughing at her theories. They had called her mad for seeing what was real. This creature of the night, this being of impossible power, was the first person to look at her gift and call it by its true name: sight. She had her own broken places, her own fractured landscapes of humiliation and loss. Perhaps in mending his, she could find a way to mend her own. I don't want wealth, she said, her voice clear and strong in the echoing chamber. I want my instruments back, and I want access to your library. For the first time, a flicker of genuine surprise crossed his features. My library? A map is a story, she explained. To understand this one, I need to understand the history it tells. I need books, I need context, and I need my tools. He rose to his full, towering height, a slow, considering look on his face. Very well, Cartographer Elara. You shall have them. He offered her a hand. His skin was cool, smooth as polished marble. When she placed her small, ink-stained hand in his, a faint tremor of energy passed between them, a spark of light on the dark map beneath their feet. Come, he said. Our work begins. Would you have taken his hand, knowing you were about to map the soul of a monster? Tell me in the comments, and if you are not subscribed yet, join this family. He led her to a wing of the castle that had been sealed for centuries. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, leather, and beeswax. The library was a cathedral of knowledge, shelves stretching up into a vaulted darkness far above, reachable only by precarious rolling ladders. It was a labyrinth of books, scrolls, and celestial charts, a collection spanning millennia. And in the center of the room, on a large oaken table, lay her things. Not the simple apprentice's tools she'd last held, but a brand new set. Compass and calipers of gleaming silver, rulers of inlaid ivory, and quills tipped with iridescent raven feathers. Beside them lay a single heavy iron key. This wing is yours, Valerius stated. No one will enter without your permission, not even me. Their days fell into a strange, quiet rhythm. Elara would spend her mornings in the library, poring over ancient texts, histories of the land, and the Valerius bloodline, searching for clues, for the context she knew she needed. She read of forgotten wars, of powerful sorceries, of a time when the world was younger and more magic flowed through the veins of the earth. She learned that the Valerius family were not just rulers, but guardians, intrinsically tied to the health of the land itself. His wound was the land's wound. In the afternoons, they would work in the mosaic chamber. She would walk the fractured floor, her senses open, feeling the weak pulse of the energy lines. She would call out directions, guiding him. Here, she would say, her voice soft in the cavernous space. There was a confluence here, a spring of some kind. It's gone dry, and he, the powerful Lord, would obey her command. He would kneel on the cold stone, his long, pale fingers tracing the lines she indicated. As he focused his will, a faint shimmer would appear on the tiles. He was pouring his own faint memories into the map, trying to coax the dead streams back to life. It was exhausting work for both of them. She would leave the chamber feeling drained, as if she had run for miles. He would look paler, the shadows under his eyes deeper. In the long, silent evenings, he would often join her in the library. He would not speak, but would settle into a high-backed chair in a far corner, a heavy tome open on his lap. But he wasn't reading. He was watching her. She could feel his gaze on her as she worked, a heavy, contemplative weight. It was no longer the predatory focus of their first meeting. It was something else, something quieter, something that felt disturbingly like respect. One evening, a fierce storm raged outside, the wind howling like a hungry wolf against the castle walls. Elara was perched atop a ladder, reaching for a crumbling atlas on a high shelf. Her fingers brushed the spine, but the book was heavier than she anticipated. It slipped, and she lost her balance. She cried out, a small, sharp sound, as the ladder tilted precariously. She braced for the fall, for the sickening crunch of bone on the stone floor. But the impact never came. She opened her eyes to find herself suspended in mid-air, just a foot from the ground. Valerius was across the room, his hand outstretched, his dark eyes wide with alarm. The air around her shimmered, a tangible force holding her aloft. He hadn't moved from his chair, yet he had caught her. He lowered her to the floor as gently as a falling feather. He was by her side in an instant, his usual impossible stillness broken. "Are you harmed?" he asked, his voice tight with a strange, raw emotion she had never heard before. "No," she breathed, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I am fine. Thank you." He looked at her, then at the fallen book, and a flicker of self-recrimination crossed his face. "This library is not safe for you. The collection is too vast." "It is the most wonderful place I have ever been," she countered softly. His expression softened. "You are not afraid," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Of this place. Of me." "Should I be?" she asked, meeting his gaze directly. He held her gaze for a long moment. "Everyone else is. Everyone else doesn't get to spend their evenings in a library like this," she replied with a small smile. A change occurred after that night. The space between them seemed to shrink. He began to speak to her during their evenings in the library. He would ask about her work, about the patterns she was discovering. And he began to share his own knowledge, pointing her toward books that held forgotten secrets, translating passages from languages long dead. She learned that he was not just a king, but a scholar of breathtaking intellect. He spoke of astronomy, alchemy, and philosophy with an intimacy born of having lived through the ages he described. She, in turn, told him of her life, of her dreams of mapping the world, of the humiliation she'd suffered at the guild. She spoke of the loneliness of seeing a world no one else could, of being told her greatest strength was a madness. He listened, his stillness a comfort, his silence an act of validation. He never pitied her. He seemed to understand. One afternoon in the mosaic chamber, they hit a wall. A vast, dark patch on the map refused to yield any light. It was a void, a place of such profound loss that it seemed to swallow all energy. Elara felt a deep, chilling despair emanating from it, a sorrow so immense it made her own heart ache in sympathy. "I can't see anything here," she confessed, her voice strained. "It's nothing. A hole." Valerius stood beside her, his face grim. This is the heart of the damage. This is the place of the betrayal. I have no memory of it at all. Only the echo of the pain." Elara knelt down, her instincts taking over. She ignored the broken tiles and placed her hand flat on the cold stone in the center of the void. She closed her eyes and reached out not with her sight, but with her empathy. She tried to feel the shape of the wound, to understand the nature of the sorrow. "There was a woman," she whispered, the words coming to her unbidden. "She had hair like moonlight, and a laugh like silver bells. She gave you a gift, a star metal locket." Valerius let out a strangled sound. He dropped to his knees beside her, his composure finally shattering. "Lirael," he breathed, the name a ghost on his lips. "My wife." A single, agonizing memory broke through the darkness. A flash of a beautiful, smiling face of a hand placing a cool metal object into his, and then another flash, the same face twisted in betrayal, a blade, a searing pain, and then nothing. The void. He recoiled from the map as if burned, clutching his head. A low groan of pure agony escaped his lips. The shadows in the room writhed and lashed out, and the temperature plummeted. Frost spiderwebbed across the floor from where he knelt. Elara didn't hesitate. She moved closer to him, her own fear forgotten in the face of his immense suffering. She reached out and placed her warm hand on his arm. His skin was colder than ice. "It's all right," she said softly, her voice a small anchor in his storm of pain. "You are not alone in this darkness. I am here." He flinched at her touch, but he did not pull away. The violent churning of the shadows subsided. The frost on the floor receded. He slowly lifted his head, his eyes swimming with 1,000 years of unshed tears. For the first time she saw not the vampire king, not the immortal lord, but a man wounded and lost. "Why?" he rasped, his voice broken. "Why do you not run?" "Because I know what it feels like to have a part of yourself stolen," she answered simply. "And because I think it can be found again." He stared at her, his defenses stripped away. He saw not an apprentice, not a tool, but a woman of quiet, unshakable strength. A woman who met his darkness not with fear, but with compassion. He had lived for millennia, had commanded armies and built empires, but in that moment, he felt a vulnerability that was both terrifying and exquisitely, painfully human. In the weeks that followed, their work on the map intensified. The breakthrough, though painful, had opened new pathways. Elara was no longer just seeing the lines of energy. She was beginning to understand their language. She could read the echoes of emotion left in the stone. Joy, sorrow, love, rage. The map was becoming a biography, and she was its sole reader. She learned of his childhood, spent in a sun-drenched villa that no longer existed. She saw the memory of his father, teaching him to read the stars. She felt the echo of his mother's lullaby, a melody that still resonated faintly in a forgotten corner of the map. Each recovered memory was a small victory, a tiny piece of colored stone put back in its rightful place. With each piece a little more of the man, Valerius returned. The oppressive cold that surrounded him lessened. The candles in his presence burned a little brighter. She once saw him standing by a window, watching the sunrise, a faint, melancholic smile on his lips. He hadn't been able to bear the sun for centuries, not because it would burn him, but because its warmth was a reminder of all he had lost. One evening, he came to her in the library, a strange tension in his powerful frame. He held a small, velvet-wrapped object in his hand. "I have been called to the Southern Court," he said, his voice flat. "A tedious matter of state. I will be gone for a fortnight." A surprising pang of disappointment hit Elara. She had grown accustomed to their shared silence, their quiet companionship. The library would feel empty without his looming presence in the corner. "I see," she said, keeping her voice neutral. He stepped closer, and for a moment, she thought he might. She wasn't sure what she thought. He stopped before her and held out the object. "I do not like leaving the castle unguarded," he said. "My enemies are patient." He unwrapped the object. It was a dagger, its hilt wrought in the shape of a sleeping dragon, its blade forged from dark, star-patterned metal. "This is Senecal. It was my father's. It will warn you of danger, and it will protect you from any creature of the night, including my own kind." She stared at the weapon. It was a gift of immense trust. "I can't take this." "You can," he insisted, pressing it into her hand. The metal was cool and strangely light. "I have spent centuries believing that everyone is replaceable. A king cannot afford attachments. A soldier cannot mourn a fallen comrade. It is the only way to survive an eternity of loss." He looked at her, his eyes dark and serious. "You are a cartographer, a tool to fix a problem. That is what I told myself." He paused, and his voice dropped to a near whisper. "I have come to realize that some tools fit the hand so perfectly they become a part of it. I would be diminished without you." He let out a harsh breath. "You are not replaceable, Elara." Her name on his lips was an intimacy that stole her breath. He had never used it before. Always Cartographer. The air between them crackled with unspoken things. He had admitted to a feeling, a vulnerability he had denied for ages. He had named her as important, as irreplaceable. He, who had lost his own name, had given her the gift of hers. Before she could find her voice, he turned and was gone. A whisper of movement and a swirl of shadow. She was left standing in the vast library, the cold, heavy weight of his trust in her hand, and a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire in the heart. While he was gone, a sense of unease settled over the castle. The shadows seemed darker, the silence heavier. Elara continued her work, driven by a new urgency. She felt she was close to the final piece of the puzzle. The memory of his mother's lullaby, the location of his ancestral home, the star chart from the night of his birth. They were all converging on a single point in the map's vast, dark ocean of loss. It was a name, his true name, the one given to him at birth, before he had become the title of Lord Valerius, the name that held the core of his identity, the anchor of his soul. But she was not the only one at work. In the capital, Master Theron was stewing in a poison of his own making. The humiliation at Castle Volkov had festered into a dangerous obsession. He could not accept that the girl he had ruined had surpassed him. He began to spread whispers that Lord Valerius was a monster, a creature of darkness, that he had taken the girl, Elara, for some unspeakable purpose. He used her disappearance as proof of Valerius's evil. He found fertile ground for his seeds of hate. He allied himself with a sect of fanatics, witch hunters, who saw darkness in every shadow and believed themselves righteous in their cruelty. Theron, with his cartographer's knowledge, provided them with the one thing they needed: a map. A secret way onto the castle grounds, through an old, forgotten smuggler's tunnel that even Valerius did not know existed. Theron didn't care about righteousness. He just wanted to see Elara fall and Valerius burn. The attack came on a moonless night. Elara was in the mosaic chamber, her hand hovering over the final confluence point on the map. She could feel it, the name, humming just beneath the surface of the stone, a word of immense power and beauty. Kalin. At that moment, the dagger seneschal, which she wore at her belt, grew icy cold. A low, silver chime echoed in her mind, a clear note of warning. She straightened up, her heart pounding. Shouts echoed from the courtyard below. The clash of steel, the guttural roars of men filled with sanctimonious fury. The doors to the chamber burst open. Master Theron stood there, his face alight with triumphant malice. Behind him were a dozen grim-faced men, clad in studded leather and carrying cruel-looking iron pikes and heavy crossbows. "There she is!" Theron cried, pointing a shaking finger at her. "The vampire's thrall! Seize her! She is the key to destroying the beast!" Elara backed away, her hand flying to the hilt of the dagger. The men advanced, their faces grim masks of hatred. They were fanatics, their eyes burning with a zeal that left no room for reason. "Master Theron, you don't know what you're doing," she pleaded. "He is not what you think." "Silence, witch!" one of the men snarled, leveling his crossbow at her heart. But Elara was not the same timid girl who had left the capital. She had faced down a creature of infinite darkness and found a man. She would not be cowed by these ignorant thugs. She stood her ground, her chin held high. "You will not touch me," she said, her voice ringing with an authority that surprised even herself. Theron laughed, a high, unhinged sound. "Brave words. Let's see how brave you are when we drag you into the light." Just as the men lunged for her, a wave of absolute cold swept through the chamber. It was a cold that extinguished torches and froze the condensation in the men's own lungs. The temperature dropped so fast that frost bloomed on their iron pike heads. Valerius appeared in the doorway. He was not there one moment, and the next he simply was. But this was not the controlled, aristocratic lord she knew. This was something else entirely. His eyes were not dark. They were pits of burning crimson fire. His shadows were not just pooling at his feet. They were a storm of writhing tendrils that filled the corridor behind him, solid and menacing. He was rage given form. He was the vampire king of legend. The witch hunters, for all their bravado, stumbled back, their faces pale with a terror that transcended faith. They had come to hunt a monster, and they had found a god of death. "You dare!" Valerius hissed, his voice the sound of grinding glaciers. "To bring your filth into my home, to threaten what is mine." His gaze fell on Elara, saw the crossbow aimed at her heart, and his rage became a focused, terrible thing. The man holding the crossbow let out a choked scream as the shadows from the doorway shot across the room, wrapping around him like black pythons, lifting him from the floor and crushing the air from his chest. The other men, breaking from their fear-induced paralysis, charged. It was a massacre. He moved through them like a phantom, a blur of impossible speed. The clang of their iron weapons meeting stone was the only sound, for they could not touch him. He did not kill them. He broke them. A shattered arm here, a dislocated shoulder there. He dismantled them with a cold, terrifying precision, leaving them moaning and broken on the floor. Throughout the violence, Elara stood her ground by the map. She did not scream or run. She watched him, and her heart ached not with fear of him, but for him. She could see that this raw, untamed power was costing him. The void within him was growing. The cold was consuming him. This rage, this power, was the thing that had been slowly erasing him for centuries. He finished with the last of the hunters and turned his burning gaze on the cowering form of Master Theron. The shadows converged on the terrified cartographer, lifting him into the air to face his judge. "You," Valerius snarled, "you led them here. You, who are not fit to mix her inks, dared to orchestrate this." "She bewitched you!" Theron shrieked, his eyes wild with fear. "She is a creature of darkness." Valerius's fury was about to reach its peak. Elara knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that if he killed Theron in this state, he would be lost forever to the cold. The last vestiges of the man would be extinguished. She stepped forward, placing herself between Valerius and his victim. "Stop," she said, her voice quiet but firm. His crimson eyes snapped to her. "Move aside, Elara. This does not concern you." "It concerns me," she insisted, standing her ground. "This is not you. This is the wound. Don't let it consume you. Don't let him win by making you a monster." "I am a monster," he roared, and the very stones of the castle trembled. She took another step closer, her eyes filled not with fear, but with a fierce, burning compassion. She reached out, not to touch him, but as if to hold his gaze. The name was on her lips, a whispered prayer in the face of a hurricane. "Kaelin," she breathed. The name fell into the maelstrom of his rage, and everything stopped. The crimson fire in his eyes flickered and died, leaving only the deep, familiar darkness. The crushing shadows receded, flowing back into him. The killing cold dissipated, replaced by the quiet chill she had grown used to. He stared at her, his face a mask of utter shock. The name. His name. He had not heard it spoken aloud in 1,000 years. It echoed in the vast, empty chambers of his soul, and for the first time, something answered. A memory. A feeling. Warmth. The shadows released Master Theron, who collapsed to the floor, gasping. Valerius, Kaelin, stumbled back a step, his hand going to his chest as if he'd been struck. He looked at Elara, and in his eyes she saw the dawn of a new, terrifying, and beautiful age. He was no longer just the vampire king, he was himself again. The resolution was not swift, but it was absolute. Valerius did not kill Master Theron. He devised a far more fitting punishment. A few weeks later, he called for a special session of the Royal Cartographers Guild, held in the great hall of his own castle. He summoned not only the guild members, but nobles and scholars from the capital, under the pretense of unveiling his grand new territorial survey. Master Theron was there, a pale, trembling wreck, forced to attend. He watched in horror as Elara, dressed not as an apprentice but in a gown of midnight blue silk, stood beside the lord of the castle. She was the one who addressed the assembly. With cold, clear precision, she unveiled not only the new maps of Valerius's domain, maps of such detail and accuracy that the guild members gasped in awe, but she also unveiled Theron's life's work. Using the vast resources of Valerius's library and his own centuries of knowledge, they had uncovered the truth. Theron's most celebrated maps, the ones that had built his career, were forgeries, plagiarized from the work of a forgotten master decades earlier. She presented the proof, undeniable and damning. She did not raise her voice. She did not gloat. She simply stated the facts. She dismantled his reputation Volkov with the same precise tools he had once denied her. In the space of an hour, in front of everyone who mattered, she reversed her own humiliation and destroyed the man who had caused it. He was not dragged away in chains. He was simply dismissed, rendered irrelevant, made invisible. After the assembly had departed, murmuring in shock and awe, Valerius turned to Elara in the now empty hall. He took her hand, his touch no longer cold as marble, but cool, like riverstone warmed by a summer moon. "Master Theron once declared you a disgrace to your craft," he said, his voice low and rich with an emotion she now recognized as love. "So I will give you a new one. I hereby name you Royal Cartographer of the Volkov Dominion. Your word on any map in my kingdom will be law." He then went down on one knee, an ancient king bowing before the woman who had saved his soul. "But that is a title. I would offer you another. Be my wife, Elara. Be my queen. Help me map the future." Tears welled in her eyes, tears of a joy so profound it felt like coming home after a lifetime of exile. "Yes, Kaelin," she whispered. "Yes." Years passed. The lands of Volkov flourished under their king and his new queen. The chill that had blighted the earth for so long receded, and the forests grew green and vibrant again. His soul was healing, and the land healed with it. Elara did not become immortal. Not yet. It was a choice they had discussed, a path they would walk together when the time was right. For now, she was content to live her mortal life, to feel the warmth of the sun, the passage of the seasons. Her mortality was not a weakness to him anymore. It was a precious, beautiful thing he treasured. One evening, she found him in the mosaic chamber. The map was no longer broken. It shone with a gentle, steady light, every river flowing, every mountain peak gleaming. It was whole. He was not looking at the map of his past on the floor. He was looking up, through the great crystal dome of the ceiling, at the vast, star-dusted map of the night sky. He turned as she entered, a genuine smile gracing his lips. He was still a creature of the night, a being of immense power, but the cold emptiness was gone, replaced by a deep and abiding love. She came to stand beside him, and he wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. They stood in silence for a long time, watching the slow, silent dance of the constellations. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "A map that never ends." "It is not as beautiful as the one who taught me how to read it again," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. He was no longer a king defined by his power, but a man defined by the woman who had seen his true name, written on the hidden corners of his heart. And she was no longer a disgraced apprentice, but a queen who had navigated the most dangerous territory of all, a lost soul, and found her way home. For more stories where quiet compassion conquers centuries of cold despair, and where being overlooked by the world means you are seen more clearly by the one who matters, subscribe to Herb Files. So tell me, would you have stayed? Comment where you are listening from tonight. I stay up until my eyes burn to bring you these stories. If this one touched you, do not break my heart. Subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.